Okay, I think this is gonna work. Let me check over on my thing. Appears to be live. And we are live. Alright. Okay. So, yep, yep. Okay, so, actually, let's go ahead and, do we have, yeah, apparently I didn't have my mic working last time, so here I am at home. Just got back from a memorial service, so I'm a little bit later than I meant to be. My cat is in my lap purring very loudly, so that's the thing. I'm using a completely different mic from what I had at school, so I hope this works. Let's go ahead and get this done because I don't feel like being up all night. Right. So we ended here. Population moving, roads and turnpikes, Gallatin, steamboat, etc., etc. We did all that. Uh, yeah, the cities, the roads some more, steamboat, etc. Okay, so um, what do you want, kitty? The multiplier effect. This is a thing that's used. It's so hard to do this sitting in my living room. This is something where a piece of technology is created for, say, a certain part of industry. Um, the example that I always use is the steam engine. It was originally used to pump water out of coal mines over in England when they dug too deep and they started hitting groundwater. It was basically used to power pumps, but it was really inefficient. However, because they were, in coal mines, they could just like pull the coal out of the ground or, just off the walls and throw it into the machine and keep it running. However, they continued to make improvements on this thing, and it made it so they could use a steam engine in other places, like, for example, the uh, steamboat, as we saw earlier, or later even the the steam engine for a train, as we're going to see. So these effects would create changes in other levels of technology as things expand. We have Samuel Slater here. He was born into he was born in England, and he was an apprentice in a textile mill. And he was meant to take over this textile mill. Um, but he decided that he would make more money by immigrating to America and setting up his own textile mill. Essentially just starting, well, not really starting it from scratch, but rather than just inheriting one, he would create his own and be able to run the show as he saw fit. However, since Britain and America were still very much economically opposed to one another, you could not just leave England with one of their textile machines or even blueprints for one. So Samuel Slater actually memorized how to build one of these machines and then immigrated on paper as a farmer to America and then proceeded to set up a textile mill in New England, Rhode Island, it says here. with the merchant Moses Brown, and essentially single-handedly created the textile industry in America because, as I'd mentioned before, thanks to how England had kept us from creating any kind of textile base when we were a colony, we didn't really have much to work with. The spinning machine that Slater copied and brought over was designed by Richard Arkwright several decades before, if not a century before. I forget exactly what years we're working with here. But the machines went through a number of different variations. Arkwright was the one that created the version that Slater worked with. We'll see a later version still. Yes. So, Eli Whitney, a character we're all quite familiar with. The cotton gin was not some creation of a long thought out plan. He was essentially working to make some money. He was in a bad financial position and was working as a tutor and was on his way down to do his job and met Catherine Green, the widow of Nathaniel Green, and they made friends, and she basically invited him to stay at her plantation at near Savannah, Georgia, because it was a long trip, and this wasn't uncommon for people to stay at plantations, but to stay at other people's houses during long trips. Anyway, long story short, she mentioned that they had short staple cotton, which is a type of cotton that grows really well, not just in that part of Georgia, but really all over. However, it is very difficult to get the seeds out of. And if you've ever gotten your hands on actual raw cotton, it's nice and fluffy and soft on top, but in the middle is this wad of seeds, and you can't do much with that. You can't make cloth with that big chunk of seeds in the middle, so you have to pull that out. And doing that by hand is very labor intensive and it takes a lot of time. So, in other words, for her plantation to be able to make decent money off of this particular type of cotton, they needed to figure out how to more effectively remove the seed. So he messed around and made some prototypes. In the course of about 10 days, he had essentially invented the cotton gin. I've got an image of it in just a little bit. And while he got a patent right away, the cotton gin was pretty simple to make, and people started making copies of it, and he saw very little money from what ended up being a really important invention in the economy of America. So that didn't go well for him. Next up was the American System of Manufacture, which is just a fancy way of saying that they used machines, which isn't to say automation. That's obviously way off. But if you ever seen machining tools where you have a lathe and you put a piece of wood or a piece of metal on it and screw it in place and it holds it where it needs to be, and then you can spin it and grind it down and keeps it very, very stable, keeps it where it needs to be so it can be precise. Um, they use these precision tools to make interchangeable parts. In particular, this was to make parts for rifles for the U.S. Army. Um, According to the book, uh, the agreement was to make 4,000 rifles in 18 months. And over the course of 2 years, they'd only made 500. So the actual system didn't quite work for what it was supposed to. Actually, I got ahead of myself again. Hold on. Oh, and also this was using the plans that what's that? That a Frenchman had put together. So, this wasn't an all-American thing, but whatever. This was another Eli Whitney plan because he was trying to make money. The system itself spread up to other parts of American industry, used in other gun manufacturing, shoes, basically anything that had multiple parts, that if a piece broke and you needed to replace it, rather than throwing the whole thing away, you could just like get another part from a shop or something. This thing caught on. So especially something like clock making, um, basically anything with precise parts, because again, uh, before when you had a gun, it was made by hand, and if a piece on it broke, there was literally no other gun in the world like that gun. So if a piece on it broke, you just threw the whole thing away. There were no spare parts. Now, as I said, Eli Whitney's original idea didn't work. He only had 500 guns ready in 2 years as opposed to 4,000. But eventually, they did get it running. It just took a lot longer. Luckily, we didn't go to war with France like we were worried we were going to. As you guys may have already seen from the video I uploaded, we did end up going to war with England. But that was later, and we, were ready for that one. Well, our Navy wasn't, but anyway. But the idea of the American resistance manufacturing is what caught on, and that's the important bit. Is the idea of interchangeable parts, more precise parts. So here we have the various my brain's not working. Textile mills or textile machines. You can see up at the top there they're like crankshafts running along the ceiling, and then they run these belts to them that go down to the machines that actually power the machines. Obviously, there wasn't like electricity yet, so they were running on essentially analog power. There's the cotton gin, or at least the prototype cotton gin. It runs you put the cotton in one side and close it up, and then you crank it, and it traps the seeds and spits the cotton out the other side. Or for the full size version, got that there. And here's the machine shop that Eli Whitney put together. It's a museum now, obviously. All right. So these inventions, while they certainly changed things. They weren't a stark revolution. It wasn't suddenly, we've got these inventions and the world changed overnight. Um, but also, once these inventions came about, they didn't just stop there. They were constantly being improved upon and were gradually evolving over time. Francis Cabot Lowell, for example, created the power loom, which is to say, it's a textile machine, a spinning machine that is strong enough to withstand being used by a steam engine or a water wheel, depending on where they were, rather than being powered by like a foot pump, which was very important considering the scale that we start looking at when it comes to these machines. Jethro Wood, cast iron plow, which was also important as we're spreading further west, and the farmers there are having to plow more and more land to supply the cities. So with all this, we're getting more domestic manufacture, especially with the Embargo Act, because we're seeing, well, less from overseas, obviously. This was actually something that happened in Europe at the time as well. Napoleon was trying to starve out England by forbidding trade between the continent and England. England was doing fine because they had, their whole empire, and the continent kind of had to fend for itself. So when that ended and England was able to like flood the markets again, it ruined a lot of at-home industries. Meanwhile, here we had a lot of our own factories. Ordinary housewives were increasing cloth production as well. Similar to what we saw on the frontier, men and women would work together in marriage for more than just like having kids. They would work together in whatever excuse me, I need to get some water. And whatever job they had. So, if the man had a shop, both of them would work in it, with the wife learning a trade. And helping with the business in more ways than the typical patriarchy system would necessarily allow. We saw this as well. Neighbors working together, sharing tools, skills, labor. So, if you had one of these fancy plows and your neighbor didn't, you maybe would let them borrow it, and in return, if you didn't have chickens, they might give you some of their eggs, or in return, they might help you build a barn you were building or something. Just you help each other out. That's how they would work things out, rather than, well, I've got a plow and you don't, and it sucks for you. And of course, along the southern frontier, they had slaves. I mean, that was just how it was. So a lot of these households worked locally, but as far as the wealthier Americans, a lot of them were able to get in on this larger market economy. Again, there's typos there. I apologize for that. So, for example, families were sewing with machine spun thread as opposed to having to spin it themselves. They worked fields with these fancy cast iron plows, or even would eat things that weren't necessarily grown in their region that were brought in from further off with the steamboats. So there again, um, some more of the cloth making machines. Again, you see these shafts, crankshafts along the top to power them. It's a it's a plow, but it's an iron plow. Jethro Woods plow. Sorry. All right. And needless to say, technology uh, was greatly affected the agriculture, and in particular the South. And when it came to the South and technology and agriculture, it meant cotton. So the biggest change was the cotton gin, spread cotton and slavery across the South, in particular into the lower Mississippi River Valley. Um, but it wasn't all cotton. Louisiana, sugar was still the biggest crop. Here in South Carolina, we still grew rice in large amounts. Because, I mean, some places it was just too damn swampy for cotton. But cotton overall was still the biggest crop. 1790, 3,000 bales of hay per year. Each bale weighed about 300 pounds. By 1820, this was, of course, after the cotton gin had been introduced. Production had jumped up to 330,000 bales. So, yeah, that's a bit of an increase. Obviously, with more cotton being produced, the number of slaves increased as well. There was a greater need for labor to grow and to plant and grow and harvest the cotton, while the labor for getting the seeds out might have almost gone away. You're running it through a cotton gin wasn't nearly as difficult as sitting there trying to pick it out. You now need the whole growing it process. 1790, there were about 700,000 slaves. By 1820, it had doubled to 1.5 million. So maybe not quite the jump from 3,000 to 330,000. Because that's certainly more than doubling, but that's still 1.5 million. Now, this also was during the time that the international slave trade ended. The international slave trade ended in 1808. This was due to Britain. This was not America deciding that this was something that shouldn't be done. Britain, once again, being in control of the ocean, decided that shipping people across the ocean for the sake of forced labor wasn't a good thing anymore, so they put a stop to it, and there was nothing we could do about it. So southern slave owners had to increase the number of slaves they had by allowing the slaves to reproduce naturally, which required the slaves to be allowed to live longer and healthier lives. Now, granted, this doesn't suddenly mean that everything's hunky-dory for the slaves and all is well now. This is still human chattel slavery, and of course, a human crime. But it's a little better. Around this time, we also saw a lot of the southern slaves establishing their own religious ceremonies, uh, melding together the rites they brought over from Africa with the Baptist, Methodist, and eventual evangelical fervor of the Anglo Americans. Yeah, which also combined with the excitement that they got from the news of the Haiti Rebellion, which caused quite a bit of concern for the plantation owners. But, you'll get that. All right. I think that's it. So we've got um, the massive increase from 87 uh, into 90 when the cotton gin was introduced, and then you see how it jumps dramatically in these few years because they basically go from they've got this cotton, they don't really have much use for it, to now we can use it, and the rest of this growth is just like getting more land to grow the cotton, which is going to be, well, if we had more time this semester, that's where all the arguments for like all the states being admitted are for, like, can we use these states for cotton? Yes, then we need to make it a slave state. Like that's the whole impetus for everything up to the Civil War. Once again, cotton production, slave population, very obviously after 1800 it starts to rise. Now this is an interesting map, and I mentioned to my class, um, you see the spread of cotton and the spread of slavery. There's other regions here besides cotton. You can see like right here, there's not any cotton right there. So there's more regions than just cotton, but there are certainly concentrations where cotton is concentrated and slavery is concentrated. But I want to point this one out. This is something that I've seen on a separate map. I mean, it shows these two, cotton and slavery, but then it shows a couple more. So this region right here in Alabama, this darker band, um, that's got a heavy population, a heavy concentration of cotton, and a heavy concentration of slaves. So one of the maps that I've seen for this, it's a map of the inland sea from like prehistoric era, North America, because we had a shallow inland sea, I don't know, millions of years ago, and due to where the mountains were, the shore ended right there, and so there was a lot of like silt and stuff collected there, and made this particular area very, very fertile, and thus you can grow stuff in this region very, very well. Therefore, cotton. And since you could grow cotton there very, very well, and due to slavery being a thing, that became a very high portion of slavery. And then after emancipation, this was the next area down here. It showed this map of concentrations of African Americans in this region, and this region in Alabama is still like heavily African American, like this band. And then the final map was the voting district map for Alabama. And as red as Alabama is, this section right here, this little belt, tends to vote a bit more blue. So it just seemed interesting to me. It's something I felt like I should include for you guys. That from as far back as like literally prehistory, and like an inland sea from millions of years ago that created a belt of fertile land, to agriculture to human slavery, and then that resulting in a concentration of people living there to like their voting habits today. Just something I thought I should include. So the conclusion, now can be done. Again. So the American expansion, scientific and technological advances, literary and artistic changes. Some people could take advantage of these opportunities. Others went west. Some women in higher status could actually take advantage of education, while middle-class women were stuck where they were. Obviously, expansion of cotton expanded the need for slave labor, and, of course, made it more difficult for African Americans. Now, I mean, I'm not going against what I said a minute ago, where things were slightly, sort of, a little bit better for African Americans, and that they weren't being worked to death, but they were still being worked, like, constantly now. And of course, Native Americans dealt with this expansion by just constantly being pushed further and further west, not only being kicked out of their ancestral lands, but being pushed into areas that were already occupied by other native tribes who saw them as, well, I mean, invaders, essentially. So by the time American settlers got there, those native tribes were already pissed. So we'll get into that next semester, I guess. Okay, so that's chapter 8. I started chapter 9. That part is on the other PowerPoint. I'm not, or the other slide. Other slide. Jeez, I can't words. The other video. I'm not going over that again. So just watch that part. It's from like 40 minutes on. We're not going to be here Wednesday because the holiday. Monday and Wednesday of next week, we're going to finish chapter 9. The week after that is, the Monday after that is our review day, and then exams. So that's it. The Monday the 4th is also paper day. Please get that into me. All right, that's it. We're done. Yeah. Bye.